I interviewed for the Forest Service in 1984 because I liked silence. Most people think that sounds poetic. It isn't. Silence is practical. You hear broken branches, distant engines, thunderstorms building over ridges. You notice when something belongs and when it doesn't. I retired 12 years ago. There are things I can explain. Black bears bluff charge more often than they attack. People who get lost usually stay closer to trails than they think. A dead deer will attract every scavenger for half a mile. What I never explained were the flies. The incident happened during a routine patrol in Pisgah National Forest sometime in early October. Dry weather, cool mornings, leaves just beginning to turn. I remember because visibility through the understory was excellent. I smelled the deer before I found it. Anyone who works outdoors knows the difference between wet rot and fresh decomposition. This was sweet, heavy, unmistakable. The animal lay in a shallow depression beneath mountain laurel. Adult, white-tailed buck. No obvious signs of predation, no bullet wound that I could see. It was covered in flies, not unusual. The unusual part was their color. Instead of the metallic blue or green bottle flies we normally saw, these were pale gray, almost powder-colored. Their bodies looked dusty, as if they'd crawled through ash. There must have been hundreds. I stepped closer. Nothing happened. Most flies lift away in a noisy cloud when a shadow crosses them. These didn't move. I nudged the carcass with my boot. Nothing. I picked up a stick and touched the rib cage. Still nothing. They continued crawling over one another in slow, deliberate movements, wings folded against their backs. The only sound was a low buzz. Not loud. Just constant. Like an electric transformer heard from another room. I wrote the location into my field notebook and reported the carcass later that afternoon. 2 days afterward, county search teams located a missing hiker. Middle-aged male. Experienced. He had apparently wandered off trail, become disoriented, and died from exposure during an unexpectedly cold night. That's what the official report concluded. Reasonable explanation. People underestimate how quickly mild hypothermia impairs judgment. I arrived after the recovery team. The body was lying on its back. His backpack rested against a tree. Nothing looked especially unusual, except his face. Those same pale gray flies covered his forehead, cheeks, lips, and the backs of his hands. Not swarming, resting. An investigator brushed several away with a gloved hand. They drifted perhaps 6 inches into the air before settling onto his jacket. No frantic movement, no scattering. The deputy beside me muttered, "That's odd." Nobody said anything else. We had work to do. You spend enough years in the woods, you stop chasing every strange observation. Nature produces plenty. Albino squirrels, trees growing around old fence wire, owls hunting in broad daylight. You file things away and keep walking. For years I forgot about those flies. Then, around 6 years later, I heard the buzzing again. I didn't see them, just heard them. It was late afternoon during a patrol after heavy rain. Every bird had gone quiet. No wind. No insects except that single low vibration hanging somewhere between the trees. I followed it for maybe 300 yards before losing the direction entirely. 3 days later, volunteers found an elderly mushroom hunter who had suffered a fatal fall into a ravine less than half a mile away. Same flies. Again, perfectly calm. Again, pale gray. Again, refusing to leave while people worked around them. After that, I started paying attention. Not obsessively, just enough to notice patterns. 12 years, 7 separate incidents, 3 missing hikers, 1 illegal camper who apparently overdosed, 2 accidental falls, 1 hunter whose heart simply gave out climbing a ridge, different seasons, different elevations, different causes of death. Every single time, somewhere beforehand, I'd hear that quiet electrical buzzing in a forest that otherwise felt empty. Sometimes hours before, sometimes days, always nearby. People ask why I never reported it. Reported what? An unusual species of fly? No law enforcement officer wants to hear that. No biologist is impressed by a ranger saying, "These insects make me uncomfortable." I did collect one once, at least I think I did. Used forceps, dropped it into a specimen vial filled with alcohol, labeled the date and coordinates. When I reached the district office, the vial contained nothing but clear liquid. No insect, no fragments. The cap hadn't loosened. The seal wasn't broken. I assumed I'd missed. Memory plays tricks. Especially after long hikes, I accepted that explanation. Then I opened my notebook. The page where I'd recorded the collection had a faint circular stain across it, like something wet had rested there. No writing remained, just that ring. Everything else in the notebook was untouched. Again, probably explainable. Paper gets damaged, ink fades, things happen. People hear this story and immediately start talking about omens or ghosts. I don't. I spent 35 years wearing a government badge and filling out paperwork. I believe in dehydration, bad decisions, gravity, cold nights, statistics. I never once saw those flies kill anything, never saw them arrive, never saw them leave. They simply existed wherever death had settled first. Maybe they're an undocumented species with behavior nobody studied. Maybe they respond to chemicals released during decomposition in ways ordinary flies don't. Maybe every incident was coincidence, stitched together by an aging ranger looking for patterns in random events. The human brain is excellent at that. I know all the arguments. I agree with them, mostly. But every autumn, when the mountains get quiet and tourists disappear and the leaves muffle your footsteps, I'll sometimes stand on my porch after sunset. The woods behind my house are perfectly still. No crickets, no frogs, no wind. And every now and then, I hear a faint buzzing that doesn't seem to come from any direction at all. It hangs in the air for a minute or two before fading away. By itself, that sound means nothing. It's just an insect. At least that's what I tell myself. Then, a few days later, I'll open the local newspaper and read that another search has begun somewhere in the forest. I have never gone looking. Not since retirement. I've decided there are some patterns that don't need proving, and if those pale gray flies are resting on something out there in the silence, I'd rather let someone else be the first to find them. The Silent Zone. I spent 32 years working as a ranger in Superior National Forest, Minnesota, and if there's one lesson the wilderness teaches you, it's that noise means life. A healthy forest is never quiet. Even on the coldest mornings, you'll hear mosquitoes whining near the marshes, squirrels tearing through branches, or chickadees arguing somewhere above your head. Silence only happens during a heavy snowfall or a passing storm. Except for one place. Nobody gave it an official name. On maps, it was just another patch of pine and spruce, but every senior ranger called it the Silent Zone. The younger employees thought we were being dramatic. They assumed it was another old ranger tradition meant to scare new hires. We never corrected them. The first time I walked through that section, I immediately noticed the absence of mosquitoes. That might sound pleasant unless you've worked in northern Minnesota during the summer, where mosquitoes seem capable of carrying away small children. Then I realized there were no flies, no crickets, no bees, no birds, nothing. Even the trees seemed reluctant to move. My own breathing echoed louder than it should have, and every step sounded as if I were walking through an empty building instead of a living forest. I checked my radio because I thought it had stopped working. The static was gone too. One of the older rangers looked at me and simply said, "Don't stay longer than you have to." He never explained what he meant. Years later, a wildlife photographer named Daniel Harper disappeared while documenting wolves near the Canadian border. He was experienced, carried emergency supplies, and had spent weeks in the forest without incident. Search teams covered miles of trails before one volunteer reported finding equipment beneath a large red pine. When we arrived, the scene looked almost staged. His backpack leaned against the trunk. His camera sat upright beside it, with the lens cap carefully attached. His boots were positioned side by side, perfectly straight, pointing toward the tree as if someone had arranged them with a ruler. There were no footprints leaving the area, no signs of panic, no broken branches, no drag marks, nothing. The silence around that tree felt heavier than anywhere else. One deputy whispered without realizing it, as though speaking normally would disturb something. We searched until darkness forced us back. Nobody wanted to admit they were relieved to leave. The photographer's body was discovered the next morning almost a mile away. He was lying on his back between two fallen logs. The medical examiner later concluded that he had died from exposure after becoming disoriented overnight. No broken bones, no defensive wounds, no evidence of animal activity. Everything in the report made sense. Everything except one detail. His clothing was completely covered by thousands of tiny white beetles. They were no larger than grains of rice. They crawled slowly across his jacket, pants, gloves, and hat until the fabric looked as though it had developed a moving layer of frost. But his skin remained untouched. Not one beetle rested on his face. Not one crossed his hands. Not one approached the strip of neck exposed above his collar. A technician brushed several insects away with a clipboard. They simply climbed back onto the cloth and stopped moving again. Someone suggested collecting samples. For reasons I still don't understand, nobody did. The recovery lasted less than 20 minutes. Every member of the team left without saying much. Back at headquarters, the conversation focused entirely on weather conditions and navigation errors. Nobody mentioned the beetles. Nobody mentioned the silence. It was as if the entire team had silently agreed that those details belonged nowhere near an official report. After that case, I noticed a pattern. Every senior ranger parked outside the silent zone whenever possible. If maintenance was required, 2 people went together. No one took lunch there. No one rested there. No one lingered. The younger rangers assumed we were simply being cautious. Perhaps we were. I retired in 2018 and moved into a quiet house overlooking a small lake. Most nights I fall asleep listening to frogs, insects, and wind moving through the trees. But every so often, usually just before midnight, every sound disappears at once. The frogs stop. The crickets stop. Even the hum of the refrigerator seems to fade until the house feels suspended in complete silence. Those are the nights I cannot sleep. I walk from room to room, checking windows and doors for no reason I can explain. I stand on the porch listening for a single mosquito or a distant owl. Anything. Eventually, the first bird begins singing before sunrise, and the ordinary sounds of the world return. Only then do I relax. People think fear comes from hearing strange noises in the dark. After 3 decades in the forest, I've learned the opposite. The most unsettling thing I have ever experienced was a place where nature forgot to make a sound. And whenever my own home becomes just that quiet, I find myself wondering whether somewhere beyond the tree line, beneath the first light of morning, thousands of tiny white beetles are waiting patiently on someone's jacket, careful, as always, never to touch their skin. A chill that defies logic, whispering that you're not alone. This isn't fiction. It's a memory from my time as a forest ranger, deep in Washington's Olympic National Forest. We embarked on a 3-day search and rescue mission for a missing backpacker. The terrain was brutal, dense, ancient rainforest, sunlight barely penetrating. While the physical challenge was immense, it was an unspoken, shared psychological tension that truly defined those 3 days, a creeping unease among the team that something else was with us in the silent, shadowed wilderness. The Olympic National Forest is a primordial place, a vast, emerald labyrinth where ferns grow taller than humans and old-growth trees pierce the perpetually misty sky. Its beauty is breathtaking, yet it holds a profound sense of isolation. When the call came in for a missing backpacker, a young man who failed to check in after a planned solo trek, we knew we were in for a serious challenge. The initial optimism, a desperate hope to find him alive, propelled us forward despite the daunting conditions. Our search began on a cold, overcast morning. Our team of 5 highly trained individuals, including myself. We were equipped for extended backcountry operations, our packs heavy with supplies, radios, and medical gear. Our route crisscrossed designated trails and ventured into trackless areas, following faint clues and experienced instincts. The silence of the rainforest, usually a source of peace, felt unusually oppressive that day, amplifying every rustle and distant cry. The first several hours were a grueling grind. We navigated through thick underbrush, scaled slippery inclines, and crossed swollen streams. There were no immediate signs of the backpacker, no dropped gear, no clear footprints leading off the main path. The urgency of our mission was a heavy weight, pushing us to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. We maintained strict spacing, calling out to each other occasionally, the sound absorbed by the dense foliage. It was sometime during the late afternoon of that first day, as the already dim light began to fade further, that I first felt it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the ambient sound of our progress. A faint rustle of leaves, a slight crunch of pine needles, distinct from my own or any of my teammates' footsteps. I dismissed it quickly as local wildlife, perhaps a deer or a squirrel tracking us from the tree line. The wilderness is full of sounds. However, it wasn't just once. The sensation recurred. Each time I paused, it paused. Each time I resumed walking, it resumed too, always just behind the last person in our single-file line, creating an odd, phantom rhythm. It wasn't loud enough to be definitive, merely an additional layer to the forest's natural chorus. I told myself it was fatigue playing tricks, the mind inventing patterns in white noise during high-stress situations. But then I started noticing the glances, quick, furtive looks exchanged between other members of the team, especially those in the rear. No one spoke, but a flicker of shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of something peculiar, passed between us. It was a silent conversation, a mutual questioning of our senses, subtly reinforcing the unsettling feeling that I wasn't the only one experiencing this strange phenomenon. Attempts to rationalize became our internal battle. Was it simply an echo of our own steps bouncing off the dense tree trunks? Was the wind creating deceptive sounds? We were tired, focused, and under pressure. The mind can play tricks, especially after hours of relentless exertion. We tried to ignore it, to push past the growing unease, focusing solely on the mission at hand and the missing backpacker. Yet, the footsteps were persistent. Whenever we called a halt to check our map or communicate, the sound would abruptly cease. The forest would then fall into an even deeper, profound silence, broken only by the distant calls of birds or the soft drip of water from leaves. The moment we started moving again, it would restart, a soft, rhythmic patter always trailing our group, a quiet, unwelcome companion on our journey. At one point, our lead ranger, David, stopped abruptly and turned, counting us out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he stated, his voice calm but his eyes scanning the thicket behind us. All right, let's keep moving. We were 5. The number was always correct, yet the distinct sensation that there was one extra set of footsteps lingered, a ghost in our peripheral hearing, defying all attempts at rational explanation. Day 2 brought no relief. In fact, the experience intensified. The phantom footsteps felt closer, more distinct, as if whatever was making them was less concerned with concealment. The already heavy atmosphere of the rainforest deepened, becoming almost suffocating. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen energy, charged with an unsettling presence that seemed to track our every single move. The dense canopy above us, filtering the already weak sunlight into perpetual twilight, only enhanced the psychological effect. Shadows danced and twisted, playing tricks on our eyes, making every branch look like a looming figure. The damp, earthy smell of the forest, normally grounding, now felt cloying, a humid blanket that muffled sound and amplified our growing sense of dread, making the unseen feel all too real. Team morale, though professionally maintained, dipped noticeably. There was less casual chatter, fewer jokes. Our radios crackled with essential communications, but personal exchanges dwindled. Everyone seemed to be listening, ears straining not just for signs of the missing hiker, but for the soft, steady rhythm of the 6th pair of feet that accompanied our every step. The silence was becoming our adversary. We found ourselves checking behind us more frequently, our heads turning almost involuntarily, scanning the thick undergrowth. But there was never anything there. Just the endless green, the intricate weave of ferns and moss-covered trees, the dense, silent expanse of the forest. The lack of visual confirmation only deepened the mystery, making the sensation even more unsettling, more insidious, more terrifying. The internal struggle for me, and I suspect for my teammates, was immense. Was our collective sanity fraying under the strain? Were we all experiencing some shared hallucination, a product of exhaustion and the intense psychological pressure of a critical search? The rational part of my brain screamed for an explanation, but the primal part, the one that understood ancient fears, knew something else entirely was at play. By day 3, desperation had begun to set in. Our supplies were dwindling, and hope for finding the backpacker alive was fading rapidly. We knew our time in the field was nearing its end, and the pressure to locate him, dead or alive, intensified with every passing hour. The constant, soft tread behind us, a chilling reminder of our unwelcome companion, seemed to amplify our growing sense of urgency and dread. The terrain grew steeper, the climbs more treacherous. We pushed harder, our muscles screaming, our minds focused on the mission. Yet, even through the sound of our labored breathing and the rustle of our gear, the phantom footsteps persisted. It was as if this unseen entity was just as relentless, just as determined to stay with us until the bitter, inevitable end of our grim and unsettling search. Then, late in the afternoon, we found him. On a steep moss-covered hillside, partially obscured by fallen timber, was the backpacker's body. There was no doubt it was a tragic discovery, but a grim relief that the search was finally over. The official cause of death after initial assessment was ruled an accidental fall. A tragic end, seemingly straightforward, yet not quite. As the team worked meticulously to secure the site, document the scene, and prepare for the difficult retrieval, a specific detail caught my eye, something entirely separate from the official narrative. It was so out of place, so peculiar, that it etched itself into my memory far deeper than the footsteps ever could, becoming the true, silent horror of the entire chilling operation. There, stretching from the body, leading directly into the dense forest, was a perfectly straight line of large black ants. It wasn't a meandering trail, not a scattered foraging party. This was a single, unwavering column, a dark, living thread connecting the deceased to the depths of the woods. Their formation was unbroken, an unnervingly disciplined, almost military-like procession. This perfectly straight line of ants continued for nearly 50 yards, disappearing into the undergrowth without a single deviation. They never changed direction, never broke formation, moving with an eerie, methodical precision. I had seen ant trails before, but never anything like this. It defied natural patterns, an almost deliberate, unsettling pathway laid out from the very source of our dread. It wasn't natural, not for ants. It felt like a deliberate sign, a macabre clue left by something beyond our comprehension. This perfect, unnatural path solidified my unease, confirming that the whispers we'd heard, the extra footsteps we'd felt, were not merely products of our exhausted minds. The wilderness had shown us something truly unsettling, something that left a mark on my soul. In the official report, of course, there was no mention of the extra footsteps, no record of the unsettling feeling or the unexplainable rhythm that had accompanied our team. And certainly, no description of the 50-yard-long, perfectly straight line of large black ants leading into the forest from the body. Unexplained phenomena don't fit neatly onto official forms or into rational explanations. We returned from that mission changed, each of us carrying the unspoken weight of what we had experienced. The Allegheny National Forest, for all its beauty, still holds a piece of my peace. The clearing at 2 people assume I quit because the job was dangerous. It wasn't. In 6 months as a forest ranger in Germany's Black Forest, I never encountered an aggressive boar, never got lost, and never had an accident worth mentioning. I left because there was one place I could never explain. The older rangers didn't have a name for it. They simply called it the clearing and changed the subject whenever someone asked why patrol schedules always avoided it after midnight. At first, I thought it was superstition. Every profession has stories that survive longer than the people who started them. My 3rd week on the job, I was assigned a night patrol with a ranger who had worked there for almost 30 years. At exactly 1:55 a.m., he stopped walking. He checked his watch, looked toward a narrow trail, and quietly said, "Listen." I expected wolves. Instead, I heard something much softer. Millions of tiny wings moving at once, not loud enough to resemble a swarm, more like steady rainfall falling onto dry leaves. We reached the edge of the clearing 5 minutes later. The ground itself seemed to be moving. Gray moths covered every patch of grass, every stone, every fallen branch. Thousands became hundreds of thousands, and then the beam of my flashlight revealed millions more lifting into the air and settling again. There were no flowers blooming, no campfire, no artificial lights, no standing water, nothing that should have attracted insects in those numbers. My partner switched off his flashlight. The moths continued circling the exact same space in complete darkness. He never stepped into the clearing, neither did I. When I asked if anyone had studied the phenomenon, he shrugged. "Every few years," he said. "Nobody finds much." That answer should have satisfied me. Instead, I kept returning in my thoughts. Every night at 2 o'clock, according to patrol logs going back decades, the same gathering occurred in exactly the same place. The weather didn't matter. The season barely mattered. The moths always arrived. About 2 months later, a local hunter failed to return home. Search teams located him shortly after sunrise. He was lying in the center of that same clearing. His rifle rested beside him. No signs of a fall, no injuries, no animal tracks nearby. The medical examiner ruled the death a heart attack. He was in his late 60s, and the conclusion seemed reasonable. That became the official story. What never appeared in my statement was something I still replay every night. The moths ignored us. Police officers walked through them. Paramedics stepped around them. Photographers knelt beside the body. The insects drifted around every living person as though we were invisible. But the hunter's face disappeared beneath a layer of gray wings. Not violently, not aggressively. They landed across his forehead, eyelids, cheeks, and mouth until his features could barely be seen. One detective gently brushed them away with a notebook. Within seconds, they settled back onto exactly the same places. No one else seemed interested. People were focused on measurements, photographs, and paperwork. I remember wondering if I was the only one actually watching. The recovery lasted less than an hour. As soon as the body was removed, the moths lifted together. There was no sudden explosion into the air. They simply rose like smoke and dissolved into the surrounding trees. By sunrise, the clearing looked completely ordinary. I resigned 4 months later. Officially, I cited family reasons. That explanation was easier than trying to describe a place that never threatened me, yet somehow convinced me I didn't belong there. 20 years have passed. I've read articles explaining unusual insect behavior, magnetic navigation, and environmental clustering. One of those explanations is probably correct. I prefer believing that. But there is one detail I cannot file away with the others. I still wake almost every night a few minutes before 2. The house is quiet. The neighborhood is quiet. Then, somewhere between sleep and memory, I hear it. Not buzzing, not rustling, just countless tiny wings moving together through complete darkness. The sound never gets louder. It never comes closer. It simply hangs there, patient and distant, until I open my eyes and turn on the light. I've never returned to the Black Forest. People think I'm avoiding old memories. The truth is simpler. I'm afraid that if I stand in that clearing again at exactly 2 in the morning, I'll discover the moths were never gathering around the place at all. They were waiting for someone willing to stand still long enough for them to choose a face. Imagine a secret so unsettling, so fundamentally wrong, that even the official reports couldn't bear to mention it. A truth buried not by conspiracy, but by the sheer, terrifying inability to explain it. This isn't just a story. It's a memory, a chilling echo from the Allegheny National Forest that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the wilderness, and perhaps about yourself. This memory has haunted me for decades, refusing to fade, even as other details blur. It's about an incident from my days as a forest ranger in Pennsylvania's vast Allegheny National Forest. Most days were peaceful, filled with nature's simple beauty. But one autumn morning, a routine patrol took an inexplicable turn, an event so bizarre it was deliberately scrubbed from the official record, leaving only a lingering chill. It was late autumn, the air crisp with the scent of decaying leaves and impending winter. The forest floor, a tapestry of reds and browns, crunched under my boots. My patrol led me deep into a less-traveled section, a quiet sanctuary. That morning, a call came in, a strong, foul odor reported by backpackers near the old Seneca Creek Trail, a smell they described as something terribly wrong. My training suggested an animal carcass, but terribly wrong hinted at something far more unsettling, potentially human. The scent became noticeable long before I reached the hiker's coordinates. It wasn't the sickly sweetness of a simple animal death. This was far more pungent, a thick, cloying stench that clung to the damp air and churned my stomach. It grew stronger with every step, a grim beacon pulling me deeper off the marked trail, into denser woods where sunlight struggled. The silence grew profound too, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, anticipating what lay ahead in its depths. I pushed through a curtain of low-hanging branches, senses on high alert, and then I saw it. Lying amidst the fallen leaves, not far from a shallow ravine, was the body of a man. He appeared middle-aged, dressed in standard hiking gear, now disheveled and dirt-stained. From the state of decomposition, I estimated he'd been there several days, perhaps a week. My first instinct was protocol: secure the scene, assess, call it in. But then my gaze dropped, and I froze, utterly transfixed by a sight beyond belief. That's when I noticed it, the detail forever etched in my mind, overshadowing the man's tragedy. Surrounding the body, forming an almost perfectly symmetrical circle approximately 6 feet in diameter, were thousands upon thousands of dark red larvae. Maggots, yes, but not scattered as expected. These creatures, normally voraciously feeding on flesh, had arranged themselves in an unbroken ring, a pulsing crimson boundary. It was utterly, profoundly unnatural, a living fence around the deceased. I stood there, utterly dumbfounded for what felt like an eternity. The profound silence of the forest was broken only by a few flies, surprisingly few considering. I watched, transfixed, for nearly an hour. The larvae moved, writhed, shifted, but not a single one crossed that invisible line. They stayed within their precise circular formation, a living, pulsing red barrier around the man. It defied every biological explanation I knew, every rule of insect behavior and decomposition. My mind raced, trying desperately to rationalize it. Was it some strange fungal growth? A peculiar mineral deposit attracting them in that pattern? No, these were unequivocally living creatures, moving with purpose, yet constrained by an invisible force. The air around the circle felt different. Not colder or warmer, but somehow heavier, charged with unspoken tension. It was like watching nature break its own rules, right before my eyes, in the silent heart of Allegheny. Eventually, duty called me back to reality. Shaking off the stupor, I pulled out my radio and reported the discovery. I tried to describe the strange phenomenon, this perfectly formed circle of larvae, to dispatch. There was a pause, then a curt instruction to secure the scene and wait for the county sheriff and medical examiner. I knew my description sounded wild, even to me, a seasoned ranger. But seeing it with your own eyes was something else entirely, something deeply disturbing. When the first responders arrived, a grim procession of official vehicles and personnel, I led them to the site. I watched their faces as they approached, expecting the same disbelief I had experienced. They saw the body, of course, and the pervasive odor. But the larvae, they noticed them, certainly, but their reaction was one of professional detachment, not the profound shock I felt. Interesting, one EMT remarked, almost casually. No one seemed to grasp the utter abnormality of it. The medical examiner arrived shortly after, a stern, pragmatic woman who immediately began her preliminary assessment. I pointed out the circle, trying to convey its bizarre perfection, its unnerving stillness. She nodded, glanced at it, then returned her attention to the victim. Unusual, perhaps, she mumbled, but likely just a peculiar anomaly of insect activity. They do strange things sometimes. Her dismissiveness felt like a physical blow, invalidating the hour I'd spent staring in bewildered awe. Soon, a team of forensic entomologists was called in, the experts on insects and decomposition. I felt a glimmer of hope that they would finally understand. They donned hazmat suits, collected samples, and meticulously documented the scene. I watched them closely, anticipating their astonishment as they surely observed the unwavering boundary of the crimson ring. They talked in low, scientific tones, taking photographs, measuring distances, but still, no one uttered a word of profound shock. After their initial examination, I approached one of the lead entomologists, a man with a graying beard and a perpetually serious expression. "Sir," I began, "did you notice the larvae? How they formed that perfect circle, and how none of them crossed it for all that time?" He looked at me, a polite but weary look in his eyes. "Yes, Ranger, we observed it. It's an interesting pattern, certainly. Perhaps a temperature gradient or some unknown chemical repellent. We'll analyze the samples." His explanation, though scientific, felt utterly inadequate. A temperature gradient? For an hour, in perfectly still air? A chemical repellent that formed an invisible, perfectly circular barrier? It just didn't sit right with me. He saw the doubt in my eyes, I'm sure. "Sometimes, nature presents us with unexpected symmetries," he added, almost as if trying to reassure himself as much as me. "It's not unheard of, though certainly a rare occurrence in this specific context." Days turned into weeks, and the official reports started to trickle in. The victim was identified as a local man who had gone missing a week prior, an avid hiker with no known enemies. Cause of death was eventually determined to be natural, a sudden cardiac event. The toxicology reports were clean. The mystery of the man himself was solved, a sad but ordinary tragedy in the vast wilderness. But what about my mystery? The one with the living, breathing crimson circle. I received a copy of the final incident report. It detailed the discovery, the victim's identity, the cause of death, the timeline. Then I scoured it, page by page, for any mention of the larvae's unusual formation. Nothing. Not a single word. It was as if that entire surreal hour I had spent watching a natural impossibility simply never happened. I found the section on scene observations, and even there, only a generic note about insect activity consistent with decomposition. I confronted my superior, a no-nonsense individual who had truly seen it all. I expressed my concern, explaining how significant I felt that detail was, how utterly unexplainable. He listened patiently, then sighed. "Look, Ranger," he said, "it's an interesting observation, I'll grant you, but it doesn't contribute to the cause of death or identification. The biologists couldn't explain it, so it's irrelevant to the official record. We stick to facts, not unexplained curiosities." "Irrelevant?" I remember saying, my voice barely a whisper. How could something so profoundly unsettling, something that defied all scientific understanding, be considered irrelevant? It felt like a deliberate omission, not to cover up a conspiracy, but to maintain a facade of order in a world that occasionally threw inexplicable chaos our way. It was easier to ignore the anomaly than to confront the unsettling questions it posed about reality itself, about our place in it. So the report stayed in a desk drawer, officially filed and forgotten, like many other minor incidents. The Allegheny National Forest continued its silent existence, its ancient trees witnessing countless unseen dramas. I continued my patrols, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted. Every rustle in the leaves, every unfamiliar shadow, every profound silence now carried a heavier weight, a hint of something just beyond our comprehension. The forest itself felt different, changed forever. More than 20 years have passed since that day. The victim's face, the details of his clothing, even the exact date have faded from my memory, blurred by the passage of time and the countless other faces and events that crossed my path as a ranger. That's the nature of memory, isn't it? It keeps what it deems important, discarding the rest, sometimes quite cruelly. But some things remain, etched into the very core of my being with startling clarity. I can still vividly recall the thick, cloying smell of wet soil mingled with decay, a scent that occasionally catches me off guard on a rainy autumn day, sending a distinct shiver down my spine. And the silence. Oh, the profound, almost oppressive silence of the trees surrounding that clearing. It was not a peaceful silence, but one pregnant with unspoken truths and ancient secrets. And the feeling, friends, the feeling is perhaps the most persistent and unsettling memory of all. It wasn't just the sight of the larvae that froze me. It was the chilling certainty that something else was present. Something unseen, intangible, yet undeniably there, standing just beyond the edge of the trail, observing. A presence that wasn't necessarily malevolent, perhaps, but certainly alien, indifferent, and utterly ancient, watching our mundane world unfold. It felt as if I had stumbled upon a scene not meant for human eyes, a ritual or a boundary maintained by an intelligence far older than our species, a forgotten law of the wilderness. The circle of larvae wasn't just a biological anomaly. It felt like a visible manifestation of an invisible barrier, a demarcation line between our ordinary world and something else. Something that our science couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge in any official capacity. The biologists and authorities chose to rationalize it away, to deem it irrelevant because it defied their understanding. But for me, it was the most relevant detail of all. It cracked open a tiny window into a reality I wasn't prepared for, a reality where the natural world held secrets that flatly refused to conform to our scientific textbooks or our neatly organized perception of the universe. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, and it stayed with me. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me, an overactive imagination fueled by the isolation and the gruesome discovery? Perhaps. The human mind is capable of incredible self-deception, of fabricating meaning where none exists. But I can tell you this, the raw, visceral fear I felt wasn't of the dead man, nor even of the strange insects themselves. It was the fear of the profound unknown, of the silent, watching presence that day. So, did the Allegheny National Forest simply produce a bizarre, unexplainable biological anomaly that day? Or did I, a simple forest ranger, truly glimpse something ancient and profound lurking just beyond the veil of our everyday understanding? I don't have the answers, even after all these years. But the question, the chilling possibility, remains, gnawing at the edges of my rational mind. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else is truly out there unseen? And that, everyone, is a story I rarely tell. It's unsettling, I know. But if this kind of deep dive into the unexplained, into the chilling corners of our world, intrigues you, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good mystery, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our next exploration into the unknown. Thank you so much for watching, for joining me on this journey into a memory that refuses to die. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the greatest horrors aren't the monsters under the bed, but the truths hidden in plain sight, just beyond the edge of the trail. See you all very soon.